What's up, YouTube, and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jackie Frenchly for Wahoo's 24/7. Before we get started here on a new episode, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel and also click on the bell so then you're notified when a new episode is posted. And on this week's episode, we don't have a guest, but we are breaking down the big battles heading into fall camp, and I'm also taking more of our VIP recruiting questions. So let's get to it. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and I'm Jackie Frenchly for Wahoo's 24/7, and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. Well, we're going to do something different this week. Usually I have a guest who is either connected to the program or is connected through someone in the program, or even someone who comes on the show to help us break down UVA football or UVA basketball. This week, though, I took a few questions from our VIP subscribers to learn about what they wanted me to talk about this week. And one of the biggest topics is, what are the biggest position battles heading into fall camp? So let's get to it. Let's talk about some of the biggest position battles heading into fall, because that's one of the biggest things that this staff was working on in the spring, was evaluating their current roster and make sure they don't have holes heading into fall camp. Now, for those of you that are watching this on YouTube, sometimes you're going to see me look down on my computer screen. That's just me trying to adjust for the videos and seeing which positions we're talking about. And those of you who are listening in on wherever you listen to your podcast, if you tune into YouTube, you'll see practice highlights of whoever I'm talking about. So first off, let's start with, I think, one of the biggest position battles. It's going to be the running back group. In my opinion, this is going to be a focus on the staff. We've heard about this from Tony Elliott and Des Kitchings. They're going to rely on the running game a little bit more. They want to be a more balanced attack. Now, Wayne Telepapa and David Darrington are no longer part of this group, as we are aware. Now, the position that you're looking at the running backs is, as I try to scroll here to get to, here it is, Mike Hollins here. Mike Hollins is one that you're going to say, well, he's obviously going to get a lot of carries. That is true. But I think what you're forgetting, too, if you just talk about Mike Hollins, you're forgetting about Ahmad Foston. I think he's a big candidate for a breakout performer for this next upcoming season. Don't forget, before he got to UVA, he had 2,800 yards and 46 touchdowns in his prep career. And I think he could be one guy to watch as this running back room grows. I know Hollins is going to be, I know Cody Brown, the Miami transfer, is going to be someone that's going to be talked about, because Cody Brown is transferring not because he wasn't able to get in and play Miami due to talent. It's just because Miami has a lot of talented running backs currently on its depth chart. So I think you're going to see a very nice, well-balanced running back group. So I think that's going to be a big position battle going into fall. I think Ronnie Walker, prior to his injury, was probably number one with his injury, and an injury that most likely will see him miss most of fall camp. From what Tony Elliott alluded to at the end of spring, you're going to see a battle for reps between Mike Hollins, Ahmad Foston, Paris Jones, and Cody Brown. I really like Ahmad Foston's ability to get into this depth chart. I really think he's one to watch. Obviously, I think, again, I said Hollins and Brown are going to be the two most talked about, but I think Foston is one to look at as well. Then obviously the next group on the offense, I think everyone can agree. Let me get the video again here. And we're looking at the wide receivers. That is a very good group across the board. You have so many talented athletes in this group. You have Devon Chandler, the transfer that just came in recently in the spring. Obviously, you have Keaton Thompson that returned. You have the Tavian Wicks. You have Lavelle Davis. And then you obviously have the guys that were injured, like Billy Kemp and Nathaniel Beal. That is a good, impressive group. And I know you guys are saying, oh, wait, she's forgetting Malachi Fields. I'm not, because he's the one that I'm going to say could have a breakout season. You've heard Coach Elliott talk about him, how he was pushing, he was getting reps the one. Granted, Lavelle has been trying to get back into rotation. Obviously, when you're injured like that, when you have an injury like that, it takes a while for your conditioning to get better. But Malachi Fields last year had 11 catches, 172 yards, and we were able to see a lot of his athleticism. And I think he's, again, the one that could push the guys that you expect, the Wickses, the Davises, the Thompsons. He's a guy that can push those guys to perform better. So I think when you look in the wide receiver room, Malachi Fields is the one that you need to circle to think he's a guy that I could see making some noise in the upcoming season. Moving on, I am just looking for the tight ends here on the video. You see Des Kitchings here with the tight end group working here during practice. I think that is a group that I know UVA wanted to add more depth to that in the transport. Obviously, with Steve Stiliano's not choosing to go to UVA was a big loss for them. But they do have a couple good guys on that group. Obviously you have Grant Mish, who I feel like is very underappreciated for what he did for UVA last season. When you look at some of the biggest Brennan Armstrong's runs, you often see Mish blocking. So I think he's definitely a guy that is going to have a lot of reps for UVA. But don't forget about Josh Rawlings, who's coming back from an injury. But most importantly, don't forget about Sackett Wood. If you remember from the spring game, he flashed in a couple of times during that game. He provides a lot of good. He provides another pass catching weapon for UVA. Now, obviously, you're not getting Jelani Woods to walk down that tunnel again. He's not coming back. He's obviously in the NFL right now. So I think you're going to see a rotation among that. I think Grant is going to be one that will take undoubtedly a lot of reps just because of his versatility and what he's be able to help with an offensive line that is going to go through some growing pains early on. I think you're going to see him kind of get most of the reps at tight end in certain situations. But I do like the fact that they have Sackett Wood there, and he's going to be one that I see them battling a little bit for more rep time. Now, speaking of the offensive line, now any podcast or any story will not be I would not do my job if I wasn't talking about the offensive line, to put it mildly. When you talk about position battles, you're going to have to talk about this group because it's every day is going to be a position battle for these guys until they really cement, a good 7 to 8 man rotation. Right now, guys that I think you need to watch out for, obviously, is Derek Devon coming back from injury. He didn't play in the spring game, mostly for precautionary. They didn't want to make an injury worse. But, guys like Noah Josie and Jonathan Leach, those guys had some good flashes during spring playing with the ones. I think those are the guys that I think could really be in with the ones. And then obviously when you got John Paul Flores coming in, he's going to be really going in there and trying to get with the ones. And that's going to be an interesting position battle to see. Can he come in and get one of those number one positions? And I think he very well can. So that is something that we'll be looking at coming into the fall camp. Now, moving on to the defense. Now, obviously, Coach Rudd and co are trying to change the narrative around that defense. Obviously, if you follow UVA football, you know that last year was not a year that you want to remember if you were on the defensive side of the ball. So with UVA running a lot more on offense, the good news is the defense is going to know how to defend the run, hypothetically. So that's good. So when it comes to the position battles on this side of the ball, remember that they're shifting their scheme mostly to a 4-man front, sometimes to a 3-man front. Sometimes you're going to see 3 safeties. So from that, let's start with the defensive tackles. So right now, the interior guys let's get some video of some D linemen going here. Here's Kevin Downing. You're going to have defensive lineman Aaron Famui and Olu and Lawrence Terry are probably the guys you're going to see more of in that group. I think Jameer Carter had a very strong spring, and that's the guy that I would say you can kind of compete for those ones. And then when you look at that group, that's why they kind of went all in trying to get D linemen. They didn't transfer portal because they wanted to make sure they had a lot of depth. But those are the 4 men that I would keep an eye out for, those interior guys. Another guy that I could see moved inside if needed is Ben Smiley. I think if you look at that D-line group, he's probably the most versatile guy there that could play either inside or play off the edge. Right now, he's probably mostly playing off the edge with the guy. They're pretty confident with the guys in the interior. But when you look at the guys coming off the edge, you're seeing here Chico Bennett, obviously a transfer from last year that unfortunately couldn't play because of injury. Him, Smiley, and then you've got Green and Deshaun Perry. Those are the guys that on the outside are competing for playing time. I'm really excited to see Deshaun Perry. I remember when I was down in Florida covering the Gators, I was able to see Deshaun Perry as a high schooler at Gulliver Prep at several camps when I was, covering Gators recruiting. And he was a natural off the edge. Bronco Mendenhall and his staff were trying to move him, to a linebacker position, and he struggles sometimes in space. But I think when he's playing his more natural position, he would succeed. So I'm really curious in how he develops over the course of the next few months, especially in coming into fall camp. So those are the outlines of those groups right now. And then let's see, moving on to cornerbacks. Let's get that group here. So Antonio Clary obviously is one guy that should expect a lot more reps moving forward here for UVA. You've got, for the safeties, you have Clary, Cohen King, and Lex Long. That's a new name for a lot of UVA fans when it comes to the number one rotation. Those guys have been playing a lot of the ones with the safety unit. And then obviously Anthony Johnson and Fintrell Cypress are your two corners. Out of that group, there's a lot of good young players. If you listen to my spot with Bud Elliott on one of the 24/7 podcasts, Cover 3, I mentioned that there was a good group of young playmakers that didn't see the field last season that I felt could have made some noise, especially in that secondary year. Now, Antonio Clary was one of those guys. There's a lot of good young players in that secondary, and I think Elijah Gaines and Will Simpkins are two guys you're going to see more of and compete for more playing time as the season goes on. And I think even in fall camp, you're going to see those guys push the guys who picked up a lot of number one reps. So I think those are the biggest position battles that I have going into this upcoming season. Obviously, there was a lot of injuries in spring. If you looked at the spring game list of how many players did not factor in to the spring game, it's quite a lot. But I think once we head into fall camp, most of these guys, hopefully and theoretically, will be healthy enough. So you're going to see a lot more position battles coming up. When it comes to the incoming class, I don't see many of them factoring into the position battles. Maybe Will Bettridge a little bit at kicker. I've covered a lot of freshman kickers in the SEC that have done really well. One of those was Evan McPherson. So I could see a first-year player coming in at kicker. But we'll see how specialists work and how the specialists look when it comes to fall camp. But I think a lot of them are just coming in and, you want them to come in and have a year under their belt to maybe get some game experience with that great redshirt rule that the NCAA changed a few years ago where they allowed 4 games before they burn a redshirt. But again, I don't see many of those true freshmen coming in and making an instant impact right now. So I think Virginia would rely on the current roster before those guys get on grounds. So that is my quick roundup of some of the biggest position battles and just where I think the depth chart looks moving forward. But after we take this really quick break, I'll break down some of the biggest recruiting questions that I got from our VIP subscribers this week. So stay tuned. And welcome back to the Go to Hell podcast. I'm Jackie Franchule for Wahoo's 24/7. Now, before the break, we were discussing the biggest position battles heading to the fall camp. Now I'm taking some more recruiting questions from our VIP subscribers. Obviously, the big news over the course of the last few days was that Joel Starlings committed to UNC after his official visit. Remember, Starlings was one of the guys that I thought UVA had a good chance with because UVA was getting his last official visit. I still think UVA is in it. I know what you're thinking. Trust me, I've read it all before on our message boards. But I think UVA still has a chance with Starlings because it is, let me check my watch, May 24th. There's a long time before the early signing date period. Right now, it's uncertain yet if he will take any more official visits. He said he's shut down his recruitment, but who is to say he will not take any more official visits in the fall? So that is something that we will be monitoring in the next few months. So the question is, where does UVA go from here when it comes to defensive tackle and on the defensive line recruitment? So the good news for UVA, they are in a few D linemen's recruitments. One of them is Highland Springs' Miles Green, who is currently working to schedule an official visit to UVA at last check when I spoke to him. Then there's obviously Samaj Turner, who most likely would fit in possibly the bandit position, mostly coming off the edge, but could be versatile enough to go inside. Samaj Turner, he already scheduled his official visit. And then you have another guy who just scheduled an official visit, Woodbury Forest defensive lineman Ronnie Laura. He scheduled quite a number of official visits. He will be going to UNC, UVA, Michigan. He's currently trying to set that official visit, and also Rutgers. Rutgers will be your first official visit. Then he'll take UVA. Then he'll take UNC, and then possibly Michigan. That one's tentatively scheduled right now. UVA is obviously a good spot with Woodbury Forest. They have a good tradition at Woodbury Forest. Obviously, it doesn't hurt that Jackson Mateo, a former Cavalier, is also the head coach of the program, and has taken his team to visit UVA in the spring. So that's another guy that UVA is heavily involved with. They're also heavily involved with Ronnie Laura's teammate, Armel Mukum. He's a guy that's more coming off the edge. Both Kevin Downey and Chris Slade are recruiting him. So again, looking at a more versatile athlete. So they're both recruiting him, and I really like UVA's chances with Armel Mukum. He's currently taking 3 official visits, 3 academic institutions. So you can see why I'm confident in Armel Mukum a little bit more here. He's going to Cal, then UVA, and then Vanderbilt for 3 official visits come the summer. So those are the couple of D linemen that UVA are currently involved with. There's 1 or 2 D linemen that I expect will be camping. One of those is actually Caleb Woodson's teammate. So I'll have more information on him on our message boards later on this week. But UVA is interested in him, and there's a number of other targets that UVA is currently evaluating. So right now, those are the guys that you should know, since those are the guys that have offers and UVA is really high on. Then when it comes to June, there'll be guys that possibly get offers from UVA because they evaluated them. Don't forget, I think this goes through my next, one of my other questions is about the challenges and issues. And some other people have asked also is, how far behind are UVA? And honestly, like I've said in several of these podcasts and several times on our message boards, 2023 was always going to be hard for UVA on the recruiting front. They're coming in behind. If you look at when some of these staff members were hired by Tony Elliott, and when Tony Elliott was hired, they missed that first big recruiting period in December. So they had to scramble for 2022 kids during January, when a lot of staffs, even new staffs like Virginia Tech, was already looking at the 23 class and 24 class. Yes, UVA managed to get some of these guys on grounds for 23 and 24 and even some 25s, but they still are behind because even though they came during those visits, some of these assistants weren't yet hired. Coach Lamb, for instance, wasn't able to go out recruiting until now in the spring, which is why you see a slower process of sending out offers when it comes to quarterbacks. So this is when things are going to heat up for UVA, something that I've said a number of times. Wait until the staff hit the road, because that's when you're going to see some movement. We saw some movement of getting some kids on grounds during spring, which is great. You want to get those kids on grounds. But then during spring evaluation, that's when you're going to see new offers in the 23 class, and the 24 class, 25 class. The board is going to get reshuffled. So moving on to a next question from our VIP subscriber, Whoville06. Ask us about, whenever we ask a player about which team's recruiting the hardest, he basically wants to know, what is it? What does that mean? And what does the UVA staff do compared to other schools? Now, that really is dependent on the prospect that you're talking to. Some guys are talking about texting and calling and handwritten letters and DMs and social media graphics. It really is dependent on the staff. If you look at some of the schools, they really rely heavily on social media graphics. Some staffs, really rely on the DMs and the phone calls and FaceTimes. I remember seeing Dan Mullen FaceTiming a recruit from the field of the New York Six Bowl down in Florida when they faced UVA. So it really is dependent on the staff on what they do. And that's where, these kids are kind of saying, yeah, this school recruiting me the hardest. But at the end of the day, you just need to stay in contact with them, whatever way you do it. I think UVA does a good job with their priority targets. They really do, recruit them hard, show them a lot of love, send them texts here and there. I've seen, guys tell me about Coach 2J, sending him a lot of, inspirational text messages, motivational text messages. It's basically showing these kids that you know who they are, and sometimes showing individual messages and then not showing that it's just copy and paste messages from everybody. So I think that's what it is about recruiting the hardest. But again, it really is such an individualistic thing. One guy will tell you that so and so school is recruiting him hard because they're calling, and so will say that this school is recruiting me hard because they keep sending me edits all the time. So it really is dependent on the recruit. So it's really hard to say um, how how to really compare, because again, it really is about the recruits. And kind of bouncing off of that, talking about the issues and challenges that this football staff face on the recruiting trail, specifically to this recruiting cycle. So if you're UVA, you're relying on relationships to get the guys that you want, which is bouncing off the previous question about recruiting hard. You want to make sure that you are recruiting these guys hard. You're working on establishing those key relationships, because not only are you recruiting 23, but you're also recruiting 24, which is why it's 23 was always going to be a hard class for them, because you're coming in so late in the process. If a lot of these guys not recruiting some of these schools before, or not recruiting the area, or not recruiting these kids before, because they weren't going to be going to their respective schools that they were recruiting in previously. So again, this is going to be a long-term effort of them going to these in-state schools, going to some of these schools so they can work for the future. So relationships is going to be key for UVA. You're not going to compete with some of these big schools that have big budgets for recruiting. Some of these guys have several people just to create edits. And I repeat, I think the University of Florida department has 3 people dedicated just from the creative side for this. So this is why you kind of have to temper your expectations and understand where the limitations are for UVA. UVA also has some not academic issues. That's not quite worded well, but they do have to figure out the right prospect, but also having this whole academic side to it. And I know you're going to tell me, well, Notre Dame has the same thing. Stanford has the same thing. Duke has the same thing. Wake Forest has the same thing, which you can notice from the recruits that they're chasing. Duke and Wake Forest are heavily and prominently said among those recruits that they're offering. That is true. But that also provides limitations on which transfers they get. They cannot, and I repeat, cannot rely on a transfer portal, because they can't get a lot of the guys in the transfer portal because of the requirements of the admissions thing. So sometimes you're trying, is it better to go through the first year guys who's only had 1 year of college underneath their belt, so that they can, although they miss some credits, they have time to recoup those credits? And then, or do you go the grad transfer route, which has limitations in itself, because they have to not only get into school, but they have to be accepted into that graduate program. So that is also something that they need to fit. So yes, so there's a lot of challenges for UVA. So again, that's why you're relying so much on that relationship front. The other part of it is that you need to show an investment in the program. I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact that, yes, the facilities is big shiny thing. They could go like, Liz, look, facilities. But guys, recruits aren't looking at the shininess of it. I think that's what the biggest misconception is when it comes to recruiting and recruits. They want to see that you're investing in them. These guys are coming into whatever programs are going. Yes, their big dream is going to the NFL, and these facilities are going to help them with that. But they're also developing in other ways as well. These football facilities, these standalone football facilities, also have tutoring areas. They also have nutrition areas. Their weight rooms are all in one building, which helps them in all aspects of their student athlete's life on grounds. So if I'm a parent of a high-powered recruit, or if I'm a recruit visiting and I see that there's plans for that, or I see that's already there, I know that this program is investing in me. So
I think that's the biggest misconception when it comes to facilities, that this is a big shiny thing, that these kids just are relying on that aspect of their recruitment, and that's something they shouldn't even think about. I think they should think about that, because again, that is showing that a program is investing in football and investing in those guys' future. So UVA breaking ground on that this summer is huge for them moving forward. And just to put an example, Florida is also getting their standalone football facility. When I was down there, I covered their moving forward, and I think they're almost done building, or currently almost done. Now, before that even happened, they added academic buildings, the Hawkins Center. That was a huge thing for a couple of recruits, because again, although this was an athletic building, which was all the athletes, not just football, it was a place for tutoring and had a whole space for nutrition. So again, that showed investment in them. So again, this is not just about pretty weight room or a barber shop in there or a slide or a bowling alley. Again, this is just showing investment in your kid's future if you're a parent, and investment in my career and my academic future and my future in general if you're a recruit. So those things are going to be less challenges for UVA when it comes to more long term in the next year or 2 years for the facility. Those are less challenges for them. One of the last things, Hogan asked about any outlandish recruiting stories. Now, obviously, I have quite a number of them. Just out of the top of my head, I remember there's two that kind of stands out. One of them was this recruit that was choosing between a few schools. One of them included an SEC program. And he told me that although this was a big time SEC program, he was a little turned off. It wasn't one of the biggest reasons why he didn't go there, but it was one of the reasons that program turned him off, was because one of their recruiting letters, those handwritten letters, one of them was written, but obviously a female, because of the way the handwriting and the cursive and the bubble. He said it was a cursive bubble writing, and it was with like multicolored gel pens. And he just told me, in one of the times that I was interviewing him, he was just like, that's not me. I'm not going to choose a school because there's a pretty girl that's writing to me. And he's like, he jokes like, I don't even know if the girl's pretty, but anyways, yeah, he was a little turned off by that. And he showed me the cards, and it was gel pens. And it reminded me when I used to write notes in high school, like all the gel pens, it was all decorated and glittery and all that stuff. He ended up not going to that school. It was clear. I don't think that school even made his top 5, and he ended up going somewhere else. But that was definitely one outlandish story. And another one, basically on behind the scenes look. When I say recruiting is fluid, it is pretty fluid. I remember this one particular recruitment. I was covering one school. I'm gonna take away this. I was covering one school, but this particular recruit ended up not going to the school that I was covering for. But because I had a good relationship with him, he had told me what school he was going to commit on signing day. So I was able to get some pre-quotes and helped provide an interview for the current network that I was working with. And I had a pre-written story, sent it off to that publisher, and saying like, hey, he's going to sign with that particular school. And he was going to sign to that school, like up until maybe like 10 minutes before he was signing, the coach of another program FaceTimed him as he was walking up to the stage. And it seemed like everything happened in slow motion, because I can guarantee you, like, everything looked good. I had some contacts with the other school that he was committing to, and it was all set and good. And then once he reached that signing table, he signed with another program. Apparently, the FaceTime was with the coach of the other program he eventually signed with. And what was the funniest part of all the story was the cake was the colors of the school that he originally was going to sign with, and not the cake that he eventually signed with. Recruiting is fluid, guys and gals. It could change at any moment, even right before signing day, even as the recruit takes steps towards the stage. So lesson learned there. And the reason why I always say, if there's a recruit that is committed to a program and I say there's a slight chance, there is always a slight chance. All right, well, that's it for this episode. I hope you guys like this different episode that we did this week with no guest. Just a heads up, next Tuesday we will not have an episode again. So we're taking a 1-week hiatus, but we'll then we'll be back to our normal schedule the week after. So thanks again for supporting this podcast. I really appreciate all of you that have followed on here and subscribed to our podcast. If you have yet to subscribe, please subscribe to us wherever you listen to our podcast. And please leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your week and have a safe and fun Memorial Day weekend.